What is time to a man who has spent his life in the sky? It is not the gentle ticking of a clock on the wall, nor the soft turning of pages in a calendar. It is a currency spent in heartbeats, measured in G-force and the scream of a turbine. It is the freezing, crystalline moment between a missile lock warning and the bloom of countermeasures. For Colonel Jackson Reed, retired, call sign Black Dragon, time was a ghost. It was a debt he could never repay, a weight that settled in his bones, heavier than any flight suit. The sky, that vast, unforgiving canvas of blue and black, remembered everything. It remembered the fire and the falling, the desperate calls over the radio, the names of men who became smoke and memory. Men on the ground, they forgot. They moved on. The sky never did. The civilian world was a foreign country with a language he could not speak. It was a world of soft edges and muted colors, of predictable routines and conversations that skimmed the surface like a smooth stone on a placid lake. He was a man made of sharp angles and hard truths, a creature of the violent, beautiful abyss. Here, at the Horizon Flight Academy, nestled in the sun-bleached expanse of the Nevada desert, he was simply, Jax, an old instructor. A relic. A curiosity for the young cadets who swaggered through the hangars, their youth a kind of armor, their arrogance a bright, blinding flame. They saw an old man. They saw the deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, the roadmap of a life lived under pressure. They saw the silver that had conquered the black in his close-cropped hair. They saw the slight, almost imperceptible limp in his left leg, a souvenir from a hard ejection over a forgotten stretch of desert. They saw the way he moved, with a deliberate, unnerving economy of motion, no wasted energy, no theatrical gestures. It was the stillness of a predator at rest, but they mistook it for the slow hesitation of age. They saw his hands, thick with calluses and mapped with a network of pale scars, and they thought of a mechanic, not a warrior. He was their adversary for the day's training sortie. A simple dissimilar air combat training exercise. DACT. 1 versus 4. The old guard against the new breed. The cadets, fresh from the top of their class at the Air Force Academy, saw it as a joke. A paid vacation day. A chance to wax the old man and add a story to their barroom repertoire. They were the future, clad in cutting-edge flight gear, their minds brimming with the latest doctrines and simulations. They were assigned to fly the F-16 Vipers the Academy leased, sleek, powerful fighting machines. Jax was assigned his own plane. His plane was another source of their amusement. It was a T-38 Talon, a trainer jet that had been in service since the 1960s. But this was not just any Talon. This was Ghost, she was his. He had bought the decommissioned airframe with his own money, a king's ransom scraped together over a lifetime of service. He had spent a decade rebuilding her from the skeleton up, not to her original specifications, but to his. She was a paradox, an antique shell wrapped around a modern heart. Her avionics were a bespoke suite of glass displays and processors he had sourced through old contacts, men who owed him favors that were never spoken of. Her engines were tuned to a razor's edge, tweaked and balanced by his own scarred hands until they hummed with a power that the original designers never intended. Her airframe was reinforced, stressed for maneuvers that would tear a standard Talon apart. From the outside, she looked her age. Her paint was a flat, non-reflective gray, faded and chipped in places. She bore no markings save for a single, almost invisible stencil beneath the cockpit canopy, a coiled, sleeping dragon, rendered in black. The cadets saw a museum piece. They didn't see the ghost in the machine. They didn't see the thousands of hours Jax had poured into her, the sweat and blood that had dripped onto her wiring, the whispered conversations he had with her in the lonely quiet of his private hangar. She was his last link to the man he had been. She was his penance and his sanctuary. She was the only thing in this soft, quiet world that truly understood him. The briefing room was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a place of fluorescent lights that hummed with an irritating frequency, casting a pale, sickly light on the faces of the young men arrayed before him. There were 4 of them, all sharp jaws and confident smiles, their flight suits crisp and new. They sat with a practiced slouch, an affectation of nonchalant competence. Their leader, a cadet named Ryan Vance, call sign, Hotshot, did the talking. So, Mr. Reed, Vance began, the title and Mr. Deliberate, subtle barb. In their world, a man of his age should be Colonel or Sir Mr. was what you called the janitor. The scenario is pretty straightforward. You're the aggressor. We're the foreship on patrol. You try to get past us to a simulated target. We, prevent that, he grinned, a flash of white teeth. Should be over pretty quick. We'll try not to ding up your antique. The other cadets chuckled. Jack stood before them, his arms crossed over his chest. He did not react. His face was a mask of placid neutrality. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, moved from one face to the next, taking their measure. He saw the bravado. He saw the hunger for glory. But he also saw the hollowness behind it. They had flown thousands of hours in simulators. They had memorized every manual, every emergency procedure. They had perfect scores on their written exams. But they had never been truly tested. They had never faced a moment where the simulation ended and the blood in their veins turned to ice. They had never looked an enemy in the eye. The training parameters are clear, Jack said, his voice a low rumble, flat and devoid of emotion. It was a voice that carried, a voice home to cut through the shriek of a jet engine and the static of a combat radio. The ceiling is 40,000 feet. The floor is 5,000. The northern boundary is grid line 279. Do not cross it. That area is hot today. Live fire exercises. F-22s from Nellis are running intercepts in that box. Is that understood? Vance waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, we got the brief. Don't worry, old-timer. We won't stray from the playground, the condescension was thick, syrupy. We'll be done with you and back on the ground before the Raptors even spool up. Jax held his gaze. He saw the challenge in the young man's eyes, the desperate need to prove himself against a ghost. It was a tale as old as time. The young bulls challenging the old one. It was a dance he had seen many times before. It rarely ended well for the young. Flight hours, Jack said, the words dropping like stones into the quiet room. You have, what, 200 hours in a fast jet, cadet? 300. Vance bristled, his posture straightening. I have 520 hours, sir. Top of my class in ACM. 520 hours, Jax repeated, the words toneless. He let the number hang in the air. I have over 9,000. 4,000 of those were in combat. So let me be clear. Today, I am your instructor. The sky is my classroom. You will treat it with respect. You will treat the exercise with respect. You will fly the parameters I have given you. If you deviate, I will end this lesson. And you will not like the grade you receive. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer, immovable weight of his presence was enough. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The cadets' smiles faltered. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Vance's face. He saw something in the old man's eyes, a depth he couldn't fathom, a darkness that was absolute. It was like looking down a well and seeing no bottom. Understood, Mr. Reed, Vance said, his tone clipped, the mockery gone, replaced by a sullen resentment. Good, Jack said. He turned and walked out of the room without another word, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The cadets watched him go, a new, unwelcome tension settling among them. The joke wasn't funny anymore. Jax walked across the shimmering tarmac, the Nevada sun a physical weight on his shoulders. The heat radiated up from the blacktop in wavy lines, distorting the air. The smell of jet fuel was thick, acrid, and familiar. It was the perfume of his life. He approached Ghost, who waited patiently in her spot on the flight line. Sarge, his old crew chief from a lifetime ago, a man with a face like a worn leather boot and hands permanently stained with grease, was finishing the pre-flight checks. Sarge had followed Jax into retirement, unable to stomach the new Air Force, a world of paperwork and risk-averse commanders. He was the only other person Jax trusted with his aircraft. He looked up as Jax approached, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. "They giving you the business, boss?" Sarge asked, his voice a gravelly rasp. "They are children," Jax replied, running a hand along the fuselage of the T-38. The metal was hot to the touch. He felt the faint vibration of the auxiliary power unit, the low hum of the plane's circulatory system. It was like feeling a living pulse. "They think a logbook makes a pilot." "Well," Sarge grunted, "you're gonna have to teach them different, then." "She's ready." Topped off and purring. "The mods you wanted on the comm suite are dialed in. You can listen in on just about anything short of the president's phone calls now." "Good. I have a feeling I'll need it." Jax paused, his gaze drifting north, toward the empty, hazy horizon where the restricted airspace lay. He felt a familiar prickle on the back of his neck, a ghost of an instinct that had kept him alive for decades. Something was wrong. The cadet's arrogance was more than just youthful pride. It was a recklessness that tasted sour, dangerous. He swung himself up into the cockpit with a fluid motion that belied his age and his limp. The cockpit of Ghost was his real home. It was a space that fit him perfectly, molded to his body and his mind. Unlike the sterile, identical cockpits of modern fighters, this one was unique. It was a tapestry of old and new. The original throttle and stick remained, their surfaces worn smooth by his grip. But they were connected to a fly-by-wire system he had designed himself. The dashboard was a clean sheet of black carbon fiber, dominated by 3 large, programmable multifunction displays. The familiar scent of worn leather, ozone, and old wiring filled his senses. It was the smell of control. Of purpose. He began his pre-flight ritual, his hands moving with an unthinking, practiced grace. Each switch, each button, each system check was a verse in a prayer he had known his entire adult life. He strapped himself in, pulling the harnesses tight until he was part of the machine. The 5-point harness cinched down, a familiar, reassuring embrace. He connected his helmet to the comms and oxygen, the hiss of the regulator a steady rhythm in his ears. He was no longer Jax, the old instructor. He was a component. A weapon system. He was sinking into the cold, clear water of his focus, the noise of the world fading away. He could hear the cadets on the shared tactical frequency. Their chatter was loose, arrogant. "Can't believe they stuck us with this fossil. My grandpa flew one of these. Just paint the target on him, hotshot. Let's make it quick. I wanna hit the O Club before happy hour ends." "Don't worry, boys," came Vance's voice, smooth and confident. "We'll give the old man a good view of our tailpipes. Let's see how his 9,000 hours handle a high-G yo-yo." Jax listened, his expression unchanging. He keyed his MIC. His voice was calm, clipped. "Ghost is on station. Ready for taxi." The tower cleared him, and he nudged the throttle forward. Ghost rolled onto the taxiway, her movements smooth and precise. He saw the 4 ship of F-16s ahead of him, their powerful engines roaring, washing the air with heat and noise. They were beautiful, deadly machines. But a weapon is only as good as the hand that wields it. He took the runway, the cadets lining up behind him in their designated formation. The tower gave the clear. "All call signs, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is 090 at 5. Have a good flight." Jax's hand rested on the throttle. He looked down the long, black ribbon of asphalt. He remembered his first takeoff. The terror and the exhilaration. He remembered his last combat takeoff, from a dusty, makeshift airstrip in a place that didn't exist on any public map, the air thick with the promise of violence. It all felt the same. The same surge of power, the same sense of leaving the world behind. He pushed the throttle to the firewall. The custom-tuned engines of the T-38 screamed, a piercing, high-pitched shriek that was different from a standard Talon's roar. It was hungrier. More vicious. The acceleration was brutal, pinning him back in his seat. The plane leaped forward, devouring the runway. He rotated, and Ghost climbed into the sky with an astonishing, almost vertical ferocity. On the radio, one of the cadets exclaimed, "Geez, what's he got in that thing?" Vance's voice cut him off. It's just a light airframe. All show. He'll bleed his energy in the first turn. Form up. Let's go hunting. The 4 F-16s followed him into the blue, their powerful forms quickly catching up. Jax leveled off at 15,000 feet, throttling back, letting them close the distance. He flew straight and level, making himself an easy target. He was the bait. The training area was a massive cube of sky over the empty desert. The sun was a brilliant, pitiless white. Below, the landscape was a rumpled brown blanket of rock and sand, crisscrossed by dry riverbeds and the occasional dirt road. It was a harsh, beautiful emptiness. It was a place that did not care if you lived or died. All right, old man, Vance's voice crackled in his ear, dripping with condescension. Party's over. Fox 2, simulated. On his threat display, a launch warning flashed. A simulated heat-seeking missile was streaking toward his tail. It was a textbook shot from Vance's wingman. Jax didn't even look back. He made no sudden moves. He simply nudged his throttle forward a fraction and continued flying straight. The missile, in the simulation's cold logic, would have hit him. That's one kill, the wingman, call sign, Blade, announced. Your turn, hotshot. Nah, that's no fun, Vance replied. Let's play with him a little. Let's see what those flight hours are really worth. 2 of the F-16s, Vance and his wingman, peeled off, climbing high above him, positioning themselves for a diving attack. The other 2, Blade and Racer, hung back, bracketing him, cutting off any easy escape routes. It was a classic pincer movement, executed with textbook precision. It was also utterly predictable. Jax watched them on his tactical display. He saw their plan unfold as if it were drawn on a chalkboard. He let them get comfortable. He let them feel the thrill of the hunt, the surge of dominance. He needed them to overcommit. He needed them to get arrogant enough to make a mistake. His internal state was a frozen lake of calm. The ghosts were quiet. The noise of the world was gone. There was only the sky, the sun, the machine fused to his body, and the 4 hunters closing in. His mind was a supercomputer, processing angles, energy states, closure rates, and possibilities. He was not thinking in words, but in geometry and violence. Vance's F-16 tipped over and began its descent, a silver predator diving out of the sun. Hotshots in. Guns, guns, guns. Jax waited. He let the F-16 get closer, the range on his display shrinking with terrifying speed. 5,000 feet. 4,000, the tone of the simulated gun lock blared in his headset. At what a novice would consider the last possible second, the moment just before simulated death, Jax acted. It was not a violent maneuver. It was a subtle, impossible-looking shift. He pulled the throttle to idle and popped his speed brakes, simultaneously kicking the rudder hard left. Ghost, with her reinforced airframe and custom flight controls, responded instantly. She didn't just turn, she seemed to pivot in midair, her forward momentum vanishing as if she had hit a wall. Vance, committed to his high-speed dive, blew past him in a grey flash, his guns firing at empty air. He had expected his target to brake left or right, to dive or to climb. He had not expected it to simply stop. What the hell? Vance swore over the radio. He was now in front of Jax, his energy high, but his position compromised. He was the hunted. Jax retracted the speed brakes, slammed the throttle to the firewall, and Ghost leaped forward like a striking cobra. The hungry shriek of her engines filled the sky. In seconds, he was on Vance's 6 o'clock, his nose locked onto the F-16's tailpipe. Fox 2, Jax said, his voice as calm as a frozen pond. A launch tone chirped in Vance's cockpit. A simulated kill. There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio. How did he do that? It was Blade's voice, the confidence gone, replaced by confusion. His energy state was 0. He can't maintain that, Vance snapped, his voice tight with fury and embarrassment. He had been waxed. By the old man. In the museum piece. He broke hard, trying to shake Jax, but Ghost stuck to him like glue. The old T-38 was maneuvering with a crispness, a ferocity that defied its design. Jax was not just flying his plane, he was wearing it. Every input was perfect, economical, a masterclass in energy management. "All right, no more games," Vance growled. "All call signs, engage at will. Box him in. Don't let him breathe." The other 3 F-16s converged. It was now a chaotic, swirling dogfight. A 4-on-1 melee. For the cadets, it was a desperate attempt to regain control. For Jax, it was just another Tuesday. He moved through their formations like a phantom. He used their own aggression against them. When one dived on him, he would use the maneuver to pull the attacker into the line of fire of another. When they tried to bracket him, he would force an overshoot, making them turn on each other. He wasn't just outflying them. He was outthinking them by a dozen moves. His 9,000 hours were not just a number in a logbook. They were a library of every possible mistake a pilot could make, a catalogue of every trick, every feint, every desperate gamble. He had seen it all before. He had done it all before. He was not reacting to them, he was making them react to him. He was the conductor and they were the orchestra, playing a tune of his composition. "Fox 2, he said again, his voice unchanged. Blade's F-16 was the target. Another simulated kill. "He's everywhere." Racer yelled, his voice strained. "I can't get a lock." Jax was a ghost. He was there one moment, a solid target, and the next he was gone, leaving only empty sky where he had been. He used the sun, the haze, the very shape of the desert floor to mask his movements. He was fighting a three-dimensional war while they were still playing checkers. In less than 2 minutes of engagement, he had scored simulated kills on all 4 of them. He pulled back on the throttle, leveling his wings, and watched as the 4 F-16s regrouped, their movements sluggish, defeated. "Aggressor has achieved mission objectives," Jax stated flatly on the radio. "RTB. Time for debrief." The silence on the frequency was deafening. The arrogance had been sandblasted away, leaving behind raw, exposed humiliation. For Vance, it was more than that. It was a fundamental breaking of his reality. He was hotshot, he was the best. He had been dismantled, surgically, by an old man in a plane that should have been in a scrapyard. The rage was a hot, metallic taste in his mouth. It was unacceptable. And in that moment of pure, distilled fury, he made a decision. A stupid, reckless, career-ending decision. "Negative, Ghost," Vance's voice was a low snarl. "The exercise isn't over. We're going again." "The exercise is terminated, Cadet," Jax's voice was cold iron. "You are ordered to return to base." "I don't think so," Vance spat. He firewall-led his throttle and pulled his F-16 into a gut-wrenching climb, not back toward the base, but north. Straight north. "Hotshot, what are you doing?" Blade yelled. "That's toward the restricted zone." "He wants a real lesson." Vance growled, his voice distorted by the G-forces. "He's going to get one. Let's see how he handles a real threat." His plan was insane, born of a bruised ego. He would drag the old man toward the live-fire exercise. He wouldn't cross the line himself, just get close enough to spook him, to make the old relic run for cover. He would show him that this was a young man's game, a world of real risks, not just dusty old memories. Jax watched the F-16 streak northward on his display. The other 3 cadets, caught between following their leader and obeying the instructor, hesitated for a fatal second, then began a ragged, uncertain pursuit of their flight lead. They were a pack, and the Alpha was running. Jax's blood ran cold. The prickle of instinct on his neck had bloomed into a klaxon of alarm. This was no longer a training exercise. This was not about ego or lessons anymore. This was about 4 young fools, drunk on pride, about to fly straight into a meat grinder. On his custom comm suite, he was already monitoring the encrypted frequency used by the pilots from Nellis. He had been passively listening the whole time, a habit born of a lifetime of paranoia. The chatter was professional, clipped, and deadly serious. Viper 1, I have 2 new targets, bearing 190 from my position. Unidentified. High speed. Copy that, Viper 2. They are not squawking friendly. They just crossed the line. They are in the box. I repeat, we have bandits in the kill box. The voice of the lead F-22 pilot, Viper 1, was calm, but with an edge like honed steel. Roger. Weapons hot. Let's greet our visitors. Paint them. I want a lock. Jax's mind processed the horrifying reality in a nanosecond. Vance, in his blind rage, hadn't just flown toward the line. He had crossed it. And his wingmen, in their confusion, had followed. For F-16s, unmarked as friendlies, had just blundered into a live-fire training zone where 2 of the most advanced air superiority fighters ever built were cleared to shoot down anything that moved. The instructor was gone. Jax Reed, the quiet retiree, vanished. In his place, something else awoke. Something old and cold and lethal. The thing that had earned him the name Black Dragon. His hands moved with a speed that was inhuman. He didn't think. He acted. He pushed Ghost's throttle past the firewall, engaging the overboost he had built in for emergencies. A hidden system dumped a fine mist of a proprietary catalyst into the fuel mix. The engine screamed, a sound of tearing metal and contained fury, and the T-38 leaped forward with an impossible surge of power. The G-forces hammered him, but he was used to it. It was an old friend. He was no longer just flying the plane. He was the plane. His will was its command. He was a weapon, aimed north. Cadets, you have entered restricted airspace. His voice on the radio was no longer human. It was a machine. It was a command. Brake hard south. Now. Full afterburner. Descend to 5,000. Do it now. Vance's voice came back, but for the first time, it was tinged with panic. His own threat displays were lighting up like a Christmas tree. What the? I've got multiple locks. Where are they coming from? Those are F-22 Raptors, Cadet. Jax's voice was a blade of ice. And their weapons are not simulated. You have 5 seconds to turn around before they fire. The reality of the situation hit the 4 cadets like a physical blow. The game was over. This was real. The terror was a suffocating wave. They were lambs in a wolf pack's den. Their hands, which had been so sure and steady moments before, were now trembling. They were students again. Scared children. I can't, Vance stammered. My controls are. They are locked out. You're being targeted by their radar, Jax explained, his voice cutting through the panic. He was closing the distance to them at a staggering speed, his customized T-38 eating up the sky. They are painting you, getting a firing solution. Do not make any sudden moves. Listen to me. And do exactly as I say. The hunt was on. But this time, Jax wasn't hunting the cadets. He was hunting for their lives. He pushed Ghost to the very edge of her structural integrity, the airframe groaning in protest. He was a grey arrow streaking across the desert sky, a desperate, impossible race against a missile that had not yet been fired. On the Raptor frequency, the chatter was getting colder. Viper 1, I have a firing solution on the lead bandit. Roger, Viper 2. Hold your fire. Let's see who they are first. All bandits, on guard frequency, this is United States Air Force Viper 1. You have entered a restricted live-fire zone. Identify yourselves immediately or you will be fired upon. Jax switched his primary comms to the guard frequency, the universal emergency channel. He heard the Raptor lead's transmission. He also heard the panicked, incoherent squawks from the cadets as they tried to respond, their voices choked with fear. They were fumbling. They were going to get themselves killed. He had one chance. One card to play. A card he had not shown in over 15 years. A name he had buried along with the men he had lost. He flew Ghost directly into the center of the cadets' scattered formation, placing his own, older, less capable aircraft between them and the unseen F-22s. He was a sheepdog, herding the terrified flock. He was a shield. Viper flight, stand down, Jax's voice boomed over the guard channel. It was a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 missions, the authority of a man who had seen the face of war and had not blinked. I say again, stand down. There was a pause. Then the Raptor lead's voice, sharp with suspicion. Unidentified aircraft, you are interfering with a military operation. Who the hell are you? Jax took a breath. The ghosts of his past stirred in the back of his mind. He saw faces, remembered call signs. He saw fire in a night sky. He pushed it all down. He had a new mission. He had to save these stupid, arrogant, terrified boys. He keyed the MIC. The words felt strange in his mouth, like a foreign language he had almost forgotten. Viper 1, he said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant baritone that the radio seemed to struggle to contain. This is United States Air Force call sign. Black Dragon. I am declaring a flight emergency. I am escorting these friendlies out of your sandbox. Cease intercept. I repeat. Cease intercept. Acknowledge. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence on the frequency. For the F-22 pilots, it was as if God himself had just spoken. The call sign, Black Dragon, was not just a name. It was a myth. A legend whispered in hushed tones in ready rooms and officers' clubs. It belonged to a pilot from the old days, a man who flew black, unmarked jets on missions that never happened. A ghost who was credited with more air-to-air kills than any living pilot, all of them classified, all of them denied. A pilot who had supposedly retired, or vanished, or died, years ago. No one used that call sign. No one would dare. In the cockpit of his F-22, miles away, the pilot known as Viper 1 physically recoiled. His eyes went wide. He looked at his wingman's position on his display, then back at the unidentified targets. One of them, the one that had just spoken, was an ancient T-38, according to his sensors. It made no sense. Say again your call sign, Viper 1 said, his voice no longer sharp, but hesitant. Respectful. Viper flight, I do not have time to repeat myself, Jax's voice was a steel vice. You have 4 very scared, very confused Air Force Academy cadets in your kill box. My transponder is now squawking emergency code 7700. You can shoot us all down and explain it to the investigation board, or you can back off and let me get these kids home. The choice is yours. Black Dragon, out. The authority was absolute. It was not a request. It was an order from a higher, older power. Viper 1 did not hesitate another second. Viper 2, disengage. I repeat, break off the intercept. Return to patrol pattern Alpha. But sir, they are. Now, Viper 2. Viper 1 snapped. Then, his voice changed, becoming utterly professional, deferential. He switched back to the guard frequency. Black Dragon, this is Viper 1. We copy all. The airspace is clear. We are standing down. The sky is yours, sir. Let us know if you require escort. The word, sir, was a tribute. A surrender. It was the ultimate sign of respect from the pilot of the most advanced fighter jet in the world to the man in the flying museum piece. The cadets had heard the entire exchange. They were floating in the sky, their engines at idle, their minds completely blown. They had heard the terror in the Raptor's approach. They had heard the legendary call sign. And they had heard the instant, unquestioning obedience it commanded. Jax switched back to the tactical frequency. His voice was calm again, the instructor back in charge, but with a new edge of tempered steel. Hotshot flight, form on me. Wingtip to wingtip. We are flying home. Now. There was no argument. No hesitation. Roger that, Black. Sir, Vance stammered. The arrogance was not just gone, it had been incinerated. In its place was a profound, shaking awe. The four F-16s tucked in around the old T-38, their movements tight and precise, born of newfound fear and respect. They formed a protective diamond around Ghost, with Jax in the lead. They flew south, away from the danger zone, a silent, chastened flock following their shepherd. The flight back to the base was the longest flight of the cadets' lives. The sky seemed too big, the ground too far away. Every sound in their cockpits was magnified, every vibration a potential disaster. They had touched the face of their own mortality, and it had been terrifying. They had been saved by a man they had mocked, a ghost from a past they didn't understand. Jax did not speak. He simply flew, his movements economical and perfect. He led them through the clear desert air, his old T-38 a steady, reassuring presence in a world that had just been turned upside down. He was a rock in the turbulent river of their fear. They landed in sequence, Jax touching down first, his landing as smooth as silk. Ghost rolled down the runway and turned onto the taxiway, her engines whining down. The four F-16s followed, their landings less graceful, a little shaky. The pilots were still rattled. Jax taxied to his private hangar, away from the main flight line. He shut down the engines, and the sudden silence was immense. For a long moment, he just sat there in the cockpit, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a familiar, bone-deep weariness. The ghosts were stirring again, whispering at the edge of his hearing. He had used the name. He had opened a door he had long ago sealed shut. He unstrapped and climbed out of the cockpit. Sarge was there, waiting, his face a mask of worry. He had been monitoring the frequencies from the hangar. He knew everything. "Boss," Sarge said, his voice quiet. "You all right?" "I'm old, Sarge," Jax said, running a hand over his face. He felt every one of his years. "Too old for this." "You saved those kids," Sarge said, handing him a bottle of water. "They'd be a smear on the desert floor right now if not for you." Jax took a long drink, the cool water a small comfort. He looked out across the tarmac. The four cadets had climbed out of their F-16s. They were standing in a tight, lost-looking group, their helmets under their arms. Then, as one, they turned and began walking toward his hangar. Their swagger was gone. They walked like men going to their own execution. Jax watched them approach. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Only a profound sadness. They were just boys, after all. Boys who had needed to learn a hard lesson. He just hoped it had stuck. Vance, hotshot, was in the lead. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. He stopped a respectful 10 feet from Jax and came to attention, his back ramrod straight. The other three cadets formed a line beside him, mirroring his posture. "Sir," Vance said, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Colonel Reed." He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. He looked at the ground, then forced himself to meet Jax's gaze. The old man's eyes were like chips of flint, unreadable, unforgiving. "I have no words, sir," Vance finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "There is no excuse for my actions. I was arrogant. I was reckless. I endangered my wingmen and I disgraced my uniform. I put you in an impossible position. I was wrong." He took a shaky breath. "What you did today. How you flew. And what you did for us. He trailed off, shaking his head, overwhelmed. "We are in your debt, sir. A debt we can never repay." He then did something that shocked Jax to his core. He took a step forward, dropped to one knee, and bowed his head. "I am not fit to fly, sir. I request you report me for a full flight review board. I deserve to be washed out." The other three cadets, without a word, also dropped to one knee. Four of the Air Force's brightest hopes, kneeling on the hot tarmac in front of an old man and his antique jet. Jax looked down at them. He saw their humiliation, their shame. But for the first time, he also saw a flicker of something else in their eyes. Humility. He saw the death of arrogance and the birth of respect. The lesson had been learned. It had been a brutal, terrifying lesson, but it had been learned. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the ticking of cooling metal from Ghost's engines and the distant desert wind. "Get up," he said finally, his voice quiet, but firm. The cadets rose slowly, uncertainly, to their feet. They kept their eyes down, unable to look at him. "You're right about one thing, Cadet Vance," Jack said, his voice cutting through the air. "You are not fit to fly." Vance flinched as if struck. "None of you are," Jax continued, his gaze sweeping over all four of them. "You know how to operate a machine. You've memorized the books. You can follow a flight plan. But you don't know how to be pilots. A pilot's first duty is not to glory. It's not to the mission. It's to the man on his wing. You forgot that today. You let ego and pride replace discipline and trust. In a real war, that doesn't just get you killed. It gets your brothers killed." He let the words sink in, each one a heavy weight. "A flight review board would be the easy way out," Jax went on, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "They'd slap your wrists or maybe they'd wash you out. You'd go onto a desk job, and you would spend the rest of your life wondering, what if that's not justice? That's a waste." He took a step closer, and the cadets instinctively tensed. "Your real punishment starts tomorrow," Jack said. 0600. Right here. You will report to me. You are no longer Air Force cadets on a fun rotation. You are my trainees. I am going to strip away everything you think you know. I'm going to take you back to basics. We're not going to fly fighters. We're going to fly trainers with no HUDs, no flight assists, no computers to save you. You're going to learn to fly with your hands, your feet, and what's between your ears. You're going to learn about energy. You're going to learn about humility. You're going to learn what it means to trust the man next to you more than you trust yourself." He stared hard at Vance. "You think you have 500 hours? You have 0. Your logbook is empty. Starting tomorrow, you will earn every single minute. I will push you until you break. And then I will push you further. And if you survive, if you don't quit, then maybe, just maybe, you will become pilots. Do you understand me?" Vance's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a dawning, desperate hope. This was not a punishment. This was a second chance. This was a gift. "Sir?" "Yes, sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Jack said, his voice flat. "You'll be cursing my name by the end of the first day. Now get out of my sight. And clean up your F-16s. They look like they were flown by amateurs." The cadets, galvanized by a new and terrifying purpose, snapped the sharpest salutes of their lives. "Yes, sir," they chorused. They turned as one and practically jogged back toward their aircraft, their movements crisp, energized. The cloud of despair had been replaced by the fire of determination. Jax watched them go, a long, slow breath escaping his lips. He felt a strange lightness in his chest. The ghosts were still there, but they were quieter now. They had receded to the corners of his mind, their whispers fading. For the first time in a long time, he had a mission. A real one. Not just going through the motions, but shaping the future, forging warriors. He was not just an instructor anymore. He was a commander again. Sarge came up beside him, holding out a greasy rag. "Gonna need to give Ghost a once-over, boss. You pushed her hard." Jax took the rag and ran a hand over the T-38's wing. The metal was still warm. "She did good, Sarge." "She always does." He looked at the coiled dragon emblem under the canopy. It seemed less like it was sleeping now, and more like it was simply waiting. "Black Dragon, huh?" Sarge said quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. "Been a long time since I heard that name on the air." "Let's hope it's the last time," Jack said. But he knew it wasn't true. He had opened the door. The legend was awake. And he had a new squadron to lead. The next morning, the sun was not yet a rumor on the eastern horizon when the 4 cadets stood at attention in front of Jax's hangar. The air was cold, the sky a deep, star-dusted indigo. They were clad not in their sleek flight suits, but in standard fatigues. Their faces were clean-shaven, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Jax emerged from the hangar as the first hint of dawn painted the mountains in shades of purple and gray. He was holding 4 thick, bound manuals. He dropped them on the ground in front of the cadets with a heavy thud. "Your new Bibles," he announced. "Basic flight maneuvers. Aerodynamics for morons. You will know them by heart. You will eat, sleep, and breathe them. Your lives will depend on them, not on some computer." For weeks, they did not fly. Their training was a brutal, relentless grind on the ground. They spent hours in classrooms where Jax drilled them on the physics of flight with a merciless intensity. He drew diagrams on a whiteboard, explaining the intricate dance of lift, drag, thrust, and weight. He spoke of energy states not as a concept, but as a lifeblood. "The sky is a war of attrition against gravity," he told them, his voice a low growl. "You manage your energy better than the other guy, you win. You waste it, you die. It's that simple." They spent hours in the simulators, but not the advanced F-16 ones they were used to. Jax had them programmed to mimic the flight characteristics of a basic propeller plane. He failed their engines. He iced up their wings. He threw them into unrecoverable spins. He forced them to confront every possible failure, not with a button press, but with stick and rudder. He was breaking their reliance on technology, forcing them to use their instincts. He ran them ragged on the ground as well. Every day started with a 5-mile run in the pre-dawn cold. He pushed them through grueling physical training, building not just their bodies, but their tolerance for pain and exhaustion. "Fatigue makes cowards of us all," he would bark as they struggled through another set of push-ups on the hot tarmac. "Your mind will quit 1,000 times before your body does. Learn to ignore it." It was a crucible. Vance, Blade, Racer, and their 4th wingman, Jester, were stripped of their identities as hotshot pilots. They were reduced to raw recruits, their egos ground into dust. There were times they wanted to quit. Times when the exhaustion was so complete, the frustration so profound, that walking away seemed like the only sane option. But then they would see Jax, watching them with those unreadable, flint-like eyes, and they would remember the sky over the restricted zone. They would remember the calm in his voice as he saved their lives. And they would push on. A new dynamic formed between them. The competitive swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, desperate camaraderie. They helped each other study. They encouraged each other during the grueling runs. They started to operate as a team, a true 4-ship, not just 4 individuals flying in the same sky. Vance changed the most. The hotshot persona was dead and buried. He became quiet, thoughtful, and observant. He was the first to arrive every morning and the last to leave. He absorbed Jax's lessons like a dry sponge. He was no longer trying to be the best, he was simply trying to be worthy. Finally, after a month of this relentless purgatory, Jax led them out to the flight line. Waiting for them were not F-16s, but 4 old, propeller-driven T-6 Texans. They were rudimentary, honest airplanes. "Today," Jax said, "you learn to fly again." He took them up, one by one, and it was as if they had never been in a cockpit before. Their instincts, honed in jets, were all wrong. They were clumsy, ham-fisted. Jax was a merciless instructor, his voice a constant, critical presence in their ears. "Too much rudder. You're flying uncoordinated. Watch your airspeed. You're about to stall." But slowly, painstakingly, they began to learn. They learned to feel the plane through the seat of their pants, to sense the subtle buffet of an impending stall, to listen to the changing pitch of the wind over the canopy. They were learning the art, not just the science, of flight. One afternoon, high over the desert, Jax was in the back seat of Vance's T-6. "All right, Vance," Jax's voice crackled in his headset. "Give me a perfect barrel roll." Vance took a breath, his hands steady on the controls. He pictured the maneuver in his mind, the perfect, flowing line through the sky that Jax had drawn on the whiteboard 100 times. He initiated the roll, his inputs on the stick and rudder smooth, measured. The world turned upside down and then right side up again, the horizon line never wavering, the G-force a constant, gentle pressure. Sloppy, Jax said. But for the first time, Vance thought he heard a flicker of something else in the old man's voice. Something that wasn't criticism. Do it again, Jax ordered. Vance did it again. And again. And again. Until the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red. Weeks turned into 2 months. They graduated from the T-6 back to the T-38s. Not the sleek, modern trainers the Academy used, but older models, rented from a boneyard and restored to basic functionality by Sarge. They were unforgiving, honest jets. Flying them well required precision and focus. Under Jax's tutelage, the cadets were transformed. They flew with a new grace, a new understanding. Their movements in the sky were no longer just aggressive, but efficient, deadly. They learned to fight as a unit, to communicate with a glance, to anticipate each other's moves. They were being forged into a weapon. The day came when Jax decided their remedial training was complete. He scheduled another DACT exercise. This time, it would be different. It would be 2-on-2. Jax would team up with Vance. Blade and Racer would be their adversaries. They met in the briefing room, the same cold, sterile room as before. But the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no bravado, no jokes. Only a quiet, focused intensity. The parameters are the same as last time, Jax said, looking at the 4 young men who stood before him. They were leaner, harder. The childish arrogance in their eyes had been replaced by the quiet confidence of true professionals. Blade, Racer, you are the aggressors. Vance, you're on my wing. Let's see what you've learned. Yes, sir, they said in unison. In the sky, the transformation was breathtaking. Blade and Racer flew with a cunning and discipline they had never possessed before. They used their F-16's foot superior power to their advantage, trying to isolate Jax and Vance. But this time, Jax was not alone. Vance stuck to him like a shadow, his F-16 a seamless extension of Jax's ghost. When Jax broke left, Vance was there, guarding his 6. When Jax dived, Vance was high above, clearing his tail. They moved as one entity, 2 bodies with a single mind. Vance, Jax's voice was calm on the radio. I'm going to pull them into a defensive spiral. When you see Blade commit, brake high and come down on him. Do not fire until you are within 2,000 feet. Got it? Copy, Dragon Lead, Vance replied, his voice steady. He used the new call sign Jax had given him. He was no longer Hotshot. He was Dragon 2. Jax pulled Ghost into a descending, high G turn, seemingly on the defensive. He was bleeding energy, making himself a tempting target. As he predicted, Blade, seeing the opportunity for a kill shot on the legendary pilot, became overeager. He broke off from his wingman and dived in, committing all his energy to the attack. It was the trap. Now, Vance, Jax ordered. Vance's F-16 peeled away, climbing into the sun. He rolled over at the apex of his climb and plunged down, a silent predator falling upon its prey. Blade, his attention fixated entirely on Jax, never saw him coming. Fox 2, Vance said, his voice level. A perfect, textbook kill. Damn it. Blade swore, but there was respect in his voice. He had been beaten by superior tactics, not a lucky shot. Now it was 2-on-1. Jax and Vance bracketed Racer, their coordination flawless. They gave him no room to run, no air to breathe. Within a minute, Vance had maneuvered onto his tail for another simulated kill. The exercise was over. They formed up and flew back to base in silence. On the ground, Jax and Vance walked side by side from their planes. You did good, kid, Jax said, the words feeling foreign but right. Vance stopped, looking at the man who had torn him down and rebuilt him. Sir, all I did was follow your lead. That's what a wingman does, Jax replied. He clapped a hand on Vance's shoulder. The gesture was brief, but it carried the weight of acceptance. Of brotherhood. You're a pilot now, Vance. A few weeks later, the cadets' rotation at the academy was over. They were being reassigned to their first operational squadrons. On their last day, they came to Jax's hangar one last time. They presented him with a gift. It was a large, framed photograph of the 5 of them standing in front of Ghost. Underneath, a simple brass plaque read, "To the Dragon. Thank you for teaching us how to fly." Dragon flight. Jax looked at the photo, at the 4 young, serious faces looking back at him. He felt a pang in his chest, a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. "You're not Dragon flight anymore," he said gruffly, trying to hide his emotion. "You'll have new call signs, new squadrons. Don't forget what you learned here." "We won't, sir," Vance said. "Ever." They shook his hand, one by one. Their handshakes were firm, their eyes clear. They were men now, not boys. They left, and the hangar felt quiet and empty again. Jax hung the picture on the wall of his small office, next to a faded, black and white photo of another group of young pilots, from a different war, a different lifetime. Many of the faces in that old photo belonged to Ghosts now. He looked at the new photo, then at the old one. Maybe, he thought, this was the way you paid the debt. By passing on the lessons. By making sure the new generation was ready. Months passed. The desert heat gave way to the mild winter. Jax fell back into his quiet routine, instructing new groups of cadets. But something had changed. The weight in his bones felt a little lighter. The ghosts in his mind were silent. He had found a purpose that resonated not with the violence of his past, but with the hope for the future. He had found a measure of peace. One afternoon, he was up in Ghost, enjoying the simple pleasure of flying, the cold, clean air, the endless blue. He was monitoring the frequencies, a habit he would never break. He heard chatter from a flight of F-16s transiting through the area. "Yeah, heading back from Red Flag. Man, I'm beat. You and me both. Did you see that new guy, Vance? Call sign Saint now. Kid flies like he's possessed. No kidding. Heard he aced the DACT portion. Went up against an F-35 and held his own. Rumor is he was trained by some old-timer out in the desert. Some kind of legend." Jax listened, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in a very long time. He banked Ghost gently, turning her nose toward the setting sun. The sky was awash in brilliant colors, a masterpiece of light and air. The sky remembered. And now, so would they. He was no longer just a relic. He was a legacy. And his story, the story of the Black Dragon, would be carried into the future on the wings of the pilots he had forged in the fire of his own past. He was at peace. The war, his war, was finally over. The silence he had been searching for wasn't an absence of noise, but the presence of a purpose fulfilled. He nudged the throttle, and Ghost climbed, a grey spectre against the vibrant sunset, flying not away from the past, but towards a new horizon.